Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel Anna Bella, and today I'm going to be doing a rather unusual video. I'm actually going to be doing a video on the Harry Potter series, and by that I mean the 7 books here, the play, and not Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, or Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. We're not going to be looking at that at all, because that is an unfinished series. I'm actually going to be looking at heteronormality within the Harry Potter universe, and it's quite important when we consider this that we look at the facts. The facts are that Harry Potter, particularly the first 3 books, are classed as a children's series. You will find the first 3 books in the 8 to 12 reader section. From the 4th book onwards, things get a little sticky because we end up in the young adult section, except at the time, there was no young adult section. First things first, there are 3 stable marriages within the Harry Potter series. You've got Lucius Malfoy and Narcissa Malfoy here, Molly Weasley and Arthur Weasley, and Vernon and Petunia Dursley. I don't have figures for them. I also don't have figures for Dumbledore or Gellert Grindelwald. I don't know why. Just don't have them. Also, Hermione is missing from this collection. I'm not quite sure why that is. Those are the 3 stable heterosexual, that is by another word for straight, marriages. Bellatrix, yes, she's married, but it's kind of complicated seeing as she's in a marriage à trois with Voldemort, Nagini, and herself. Her husband is off somewhere doing whatever, mostly in Azkaban. But what is interesting is when you look at the history and when the Harry Potter books came out in context, the Harry Potter series is 20 years old now. I've got here the Family Law Reform Act of 1969 on here. Why is that important? Well, in UK law, that allows an illegitimate child basically equal access to the property and estate of a parent. And that's hugely important because for later on when we come to discuss Cursed Child. But hold on that's where this starts. Okay, in 1967 in the UK, the age of consent for gay men was 21 years. Okay, and then in 1988, Section 28 happened. And that was legal up until 2003. What is Section 28, you ask? Section 28 was passed to stop the promotion and teaching of LGBT and LGBT relationships in state schools. It had a knock-on effect because it affected youth services and children's literature. Basically, anything to do with LGBT couldn't be mentioned in children's literature as well as state schools. It goes back to the past in the public schools like Rugby, Eton and Harrow. When they were all boys' schools, there was a tendency for the older boys to look after the younger boys, and not all of this was straight or appropriate. It tended to lead to homoerotic acts being carried out. Whether they were gay, nobody can know, but it was down to too much time spent studying ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Greek, Latin, classics. What happened in public schools is they then put more emphasis on science to balance that out and less time on Greek and Latin, though they still look at that because obviously in ancient Greece and Rome, being gay was considered a normal part of male life. In fact, male sexuality had 4 parts. 1, you had a wife to continue on your line. 2, you had slaves for biological need. 3, you had deep male relationships for basically companionship, and 4th, you had goats for ecstasy. That was how sexuality was for a man. A man was a man, and he could have who he wanted when he wanted, and that was how men were back in the classical era. Obviously, you can't apply that to a supposed Christian country, which at the time the UK was. It is more multicultural now, and we have many religions and blah, 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 and all of that. But I'm talking back in the then. So this was passed by a Conservative government, and it lasted until 2003. I wanted to say 2003 because I'm so used to doing that now with 2021 and various stuff. So in 2003, Section 28 was made illegal, which for a whole raft of teachers, doctors, lawyers, it affected loads of people. And what you could say to young people, because teachers lost their jobs over this as well. It was a hugely infringing act. It affected what you could write in children's literature as well. So it explains some certain things about life, just so you know. And then in 1994, the age of consent for gay men got put to 18 years. And then in 2000, it got lowered to 16 years, which is the equivalent of the heterosexual age of consent. But the first 3 books are considered to be the most childlike. Well, actually, I would say the first 2 are. It's one of the reasons why the 3rd film, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, is so good, is because Harry is a teenager. And because J.K. Rowling made it so that Harry grows a year, so he starts off at 11 and ends up age 17, because wizards mature, become an adult at 17 rather than 18. It's one of the reasons why Prisoner of Azkaban is so good, because it stops being a children's thing. And this is where it confused some of the parents, because at the time, people thought that she could have continued on writing very similarly to these 2 and have another one. She changed the rules. And it's a big thing, because nobody had made all of their teenage characters become teenagers and grow up. I mean, we have the Pevensies, who are Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy, and they forever stay at the ages they are. They do grow up a little, sort of 14 to 17. I mean, there is the issue, the Susan controversy, which I'm not getting into. They do grow up a little, but they never become fully functioning adults. Harry Potter and Ron and Hermione do, and that's the difference. And that was unusual, because Twilight came out in 2005, and that led to the development of young adult fiction as a separate section, because before that point, teenage children's fiction was classed as teenage children's fiction, and it was sort of put in the point area. So you had 8 to 12 children's fiction, and then you had the teenage section, which was very small and actually didn't cover a lot. I mean, yes, there was the Judy Blume stuff with Forever and Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. But before that, nothing. So this kind of explains some stuff. Remember that J.K. Rowling is a Generation Xer. So, and also remember, children's literature does feature stereotypes and caricatures of people where in the first 3 books, bad is bad and good is good, and they are very clearly defined. As we grow up and we get older, things aren't so clear, nor are they clear-cut. Cough, cough, characters like Snape take on completely different meanings. And if you start the books when you're 11, you grow. Because I read this book when I was 12, I was rather bored actually by the first one, because I'm not a boy. You see. The second one, things got slightly more interesting. The third one, I was captivated, because that was the stage of my development. Harry had caught up with me, and then we went through, and he and I grew together. So if you're reading these to an 8-year-old, some of the themes they're not going to get, because if you're reading sort of book 4 to an 8-year-old, well, Harry is 14 in that. He's 15 in this one, he's 16 in this one, he's 17 in this one. These 4 are young adult teenage fiction. But because of how J.K. Rowling has written the Wizarding World, it's retrograde. They don't use technology. How they view marriage and certain other things is also retrograde, because that's the world. It's a world without technology. They've got some rather interesting views on a lot of things that aren't the same with ours. So, and then in 2004, LGBT civil partnerships became legal in the UK. Same-sex Couples Act was passed in 2013, so they could then have marriage. And then in 2019, civil partnerships for straight couples were legal. So that meant couples that wanted to to be seen in law as together and as a couple, but not married under a church. So that's quite interesting in itself. So all of this LGBT stuff and changes and with the definition of what is a marriage and what is a permanent relationship, etc., all happened as Harry Potter was being published. So this is why it doesn't contain very much LGBT stuff, and this is why Dumbledore's relationship with Gellert Grindelwald is hidden. She could only sort of write about that in the 7th book, because section 28. So there are a whole host of stuff that's crackling on. And I know, everybody knows that Bellatrix and Lord Voldemort have got a thing on from book 4 and 5. It's fairly obvious that they do. And that comes back to the Law Reform Act. The only person who is actually raised by a single parent is... We've got Neville, who's raised by his grandma. We've got Dean Thomas, who's raised by his black mother. But we're never sure whether his parents were married. It's implied that they are, but it's never confirmed. So J.K. Rowling doesn't have any single parents who are single parents via choice or by divorce. Divorce doesn't seem to happen in the wizarding world, which is interesting in itself. We do have the example of Dean Thomas. We also have Blazy Zast in Slytherin. His mother seems to be something of a literal and metaphorical Black Widow. Whether that's racist or not, I'm not going to get into. But she married her husband, had her son. Her husband then dropped dead, or she killed him, and then she keeps marrying men and they keep dying, which is interesting in itself. Then we've got the wonders that is Fleur Delacour and how they're treated, how gender is treated, particularly in book 4. Because J.K. Rowling does have a very traditional view of men and women, it can be said. Her characters are interesting. I mean, this pair we could write a whole essay on, including the snake. I mean, is it a mariage à trois? One assumes it must be with those three. Or is Nagini like mother and Voldemort is son? Who knows? Let's not pontificate. That's why I've left out Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, because it takes us down a darker path with some of the things. But it's interesting. What was I saying about the Family Act? There's only one character who could be said to be illegitimate, and that's Delphine Diggory, who we know they're her parents there, if you didn't know. But she has equal claim on both their inheritances, and it actually does affect this young man here. Inheritance does Delphine, which is one of the reasons why Narcissa couldn't raise her in her own family, because she would take from Draco because of the connection, because they're sisters. So that is one of the reasons why, yes, Narcissa protected both Draco and Harry and Delphine, but she's done it for very interesting reasons. She's protected Delphine because Bellatrix Lestrange did the forbidden curse on Snape, and Narcissa did the unbreakable vow with them, and that protected Draco. But Bellatrix also taught Draco occlumency, the ability to conceal your mind, which then led to him being able to carry out his mission effectively and be protected. She protected Harry when she lied to you-know-who, and she protected Delphine because it was Malfoy Gold that paid her caregiver. But it was right, Narcissa was right not to take Delphine out of the country or send her away, because it would have affected her ability to access. She was probably using Bellatrix Lestrange's money to pay for her, actually, and probably Lord Voldemort's money, even though Lord Voldemort's, it doesn't matter that Lord Voldemort's parents were married or not. Lord Voldemort still inherited everything from the Riddle family because he could prove who he was, which meant that Delphine would have inherited a hell of a lot of stuff, which meant that Narcissa would have been Delphine's guardian as her only relative, and I'm sure there would be legal documents for such a thing. That's why these three, at the end of this book, ran all the way home to sort out Delphini's care after the death of these two. That's why they did it. Draco didn't have a Scooby-Doo with a biscuit because these two kept it from him. Though he was aware something weird was crackling off. It is interesting, hugely so, what has crackled off here. You've got to remember that in children's literature we do have very gendered and caricatures of people. I mean, it's like the same with the Perfect Peter and the Horrid Henry books, but that's aimed at younger children. See, this is the problem. She started off writing for children, but it took a different turn. The whole series starts with a double murder for a children's series. It's most bizarre. And you've also got to remember that a lot of change in social attitudes happened. It's massive. The whole thing is massive. This is a phenomenon that took on a life of its own, that J.K. Rowling has for years been desperate to continue to control. It was interesting when the fourth book came out that everybody was calling her Queen Rowling, and I was sort of like, come on, there are huge errors here that people need to talk about. I mean, the whole Cho Chang thing. But people weren't seeing it. And yeah, it's always been there. The woman invented this guy. Come on. Yeah, there is an icy coldness to her. And it comes across in her writing because you've got Teddy Tonks, which is the son of, there we are, these two. So you've got an older guy and a younger girl in these relationships. I mean, guaranteed those two didn't get married, but these two did. And their son ended up being raised by Bellatrix's youngest sister, Andromeda, who looks like her. That is just a bit scary. And it was a boy, not a girl. Whereas their daughter ended up in the care of the Malfoys when she was very small, and then they ended up palming her off to a guardian. So Ted Tonks went to... Ted Tonks Lupin went to Hogwarts. Delphini did not. So that in itself speaks volumes. And also J.K. Rowling's attitude towards girls. I mean, is it because Teddy was a boy? Does J.K. Rowling secretly value boys more than girls? Something tells me that she does. There are issues with father figures throughout. I mean, James Potter is a questionable father figure in his youth, and as he grows, he obviously gets better. But nobody is perfect. But it's interesting because we have issues with father figures throughout. I mean, is Lucius Malfoy a better person because he appears to be a good parent to Draco? It's interesting in the Order of Phoenix that when Harry is asking him questions in the Department of Mysteries, Lucius Malfoy says, oh, he's just being a curious lad. He would only know that because he was a parent. It's interesting. I mean, there was a clear toss-up between she was going to kill one of these two in that book, and it turned out that she was saved Arthur Weasley, but that meant that Remus had to die, and Nephora had to die because these two were going to die, which left two orphans, because she didn't want to kill the perceived good father figure in the actual books. It's a pity I've not got a Dumbledore. I was quite cross with the scene in the movie, but when Lord Voldemort speaks to Gellert Grindelwald, but actually I've kind of come to terms with that because Gellert Grindelwald doesn't say Dumbledore's name. He says with him, of course, and he's laughing at Tom because he knows that he's setting Tom up for his big fall. So that kind of makes me feel better. But in the books, Gellert doesn't say where the wand is, and he just laughs at him and tells him that he knows nothing and that he's being a bit of a fool, and he's just like, well, kill me then, because clearly you are. Voldemort kills Gellert at the drop of a hat pin then, because he just gets angry with him because he's not helping him. And Gellert just laughs at him and basically rips him to shreds, which is interesting because Dumbledore called him a fool in the Order of Phoenix, and that's when he rescued Missy here. And you all know what happens when you fall in love, you become a bit of a fool. Anyway, I've babbled far too long about this. It's quite interesting when you look at the development of the lore and various other things. So this kind of explains some of the things that have been crackling off recently with a certain author. I think she's made a rod for her own back, and it's going to be interesting to see where this goes, because it's quite clearly from the early books when she was clearly writing for children that she had very straight views on gender. She allowed the world to get far more complicated, but because there was no young adult section yet, because Twilight hadn't come out, I know I keep going on about it, but before Twilight and Divergent and Hunger Games and Maze Runner, there was not a big market for teenage fiction. There now is, but it's no longer just teenage fiction. The young adult section goes from 15, goes from about 13 all the way up to like 32 now, if we are included normal people within this section, and normal people, weirdly enough, is included in young adult fiction. So that is alone tells you something. So I hope you found this interesting, because I found this interesting just looking at the dates of when stuff came out, because we've gone from 1997 all the way to 2007 or 2007, and all of this has changed. So that's quite interesting to process. Hope you've enjoyed looking at these little dudes. I've kind of enjoyed them. I didn't draw them or make them or anything. I just found them and cut them out and stuck them on things. They did have stands. I want to know where the stands went to. But I kind of think they're quite cool, actually. There's Dobby with all of his socks. Ferez. I actually was quite disappointed with the films that they didn't include more of the magical creatures within the world, because that helped build the magical world. J.K. Rowling is piss poor at magical world building. She's great at characterization and story, but her magical world building has been appalling because she allowed Pottermore to basically build the world for her, and various things. But I really like these. See, look, there's Madam Sprout. Nicely reimagined. These are so cute and unique. These little cardboard cutouty things. Look, Dolores Umbridge. I mean, doesn't she look absolutely revolting? But weirdly enough, Delphine and Dolores Umbridge spend a lot of time together in Azkaban, which is an interesting combination. Look, there's Fenric Greyback. These are just absolutely lovely. If anybody knows who the original author of these is, please do let me know, and I will give them the credit, because I found them, I cut them out, I stuck them on these things, but I don't know why or when or how. I believe I got them off MuggleNet way back in the day. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this look at the heteronormalcy that is going on within the Harry Potter book series, which probably is explaining some of her interesting behaviour, but she's made a rod for her own back, and it's not going to get any better. I find it interesting that she's gone that way. Yes, she's a Generation Xer. It doesn't excuse what she's doing now at all. It's going to be interesting, but it just shows how society has changed and how education has changed towards certain things. And because she's not been in education for a while, she's been out of it, she will have missed all of this. It would have happened in a blink of an eye and she'd just be like, what? Anyway, please like, comment and subscribe. I've talked long enough about this, just based on the books. I'm not getting into any of the other stuff that she has written about it. Please like, comment and subscribe, and let me know your own thoughts in the comments below.